Welcome, golfers, to the next episode of the Read It, Roll It, Hole It podcast. Today, we've got a special guest on the show, Hugh Marr. Welcome to the show, Hugh.
Thank you, Ollie. Nice to be here.
Great stuff. Really looking forward to catching up with you today. You are a high-performance coach, a PGA coach for over 20 years. Is that right?
Yeah, probably nearer 30 years. I'm slightly embarrassed to admit now, yeah.
I don't believe it. You don't look a day over 30, mate. And you've coached many top golfers from all over the world. So you're a wonderful mind. I've heard you speak on many sort of platforms over the years. So really look forward to catching up with you today.
You're too kind. I'll need you as my PR agent, I think, Ollie.
Don't believe a word. Hugh, just to start off with, throw you in the deep end.
Yep.
What is high performance?
Basically, for me, the definition of high performance is getting the most out of the talent and time and equipment and skills that you have. Nothing more than that. It's going to look very different from player to player, from person to person. It looks very different in all walks of life. But ultimately, it's making the very most of what you've got.
Brilliant. I love that. And how do you help sort of your students achieve that? What's your coaching philosophy around getting golfers to move up that ladder towards that high performance?
Well, basically, certainly from a golfer's perspective, and again, it applies to all walks of life and the business or corporate world as well, that ultimately everyone's success is built on something. And that's what I refer to as superpowers, that every person has superpowers relative to whatever endeavor they're committed to. And ultimately those superpowers have to be retained in any development or coaching program. You've got to understand why this person in front of you is good. What is it about what they do that sets them apart? And that needs to be retained. And that is generally where I'll start with any golfer or any human being, is we need to understand what you're good at, first of all. Number two, we then need to go on to identify where the most relevant improvements can come. And I think this is the single biggest failing of excuse me, any coaching program, is that too often the work players or businessmen, or anyone is being asked to do, isn't relevant to their improvement. And that sort of relevant improvement is fundamental to anyone being able to up their performance level. There's no point in committing time, energy, or resources to getting better if you're not confident that the changes that you're making are going to make a difference. So first of all, as I said, superpowers. Second of all, it's starting to identify what I would call the relevant wins. And when we've identified what the relevant wins are, then we go straight into, right, what's the low-hanging fruit? Where can we make the biggest gains with the least effort? And I refer to them as painless gains. So we're constantly looking for the low-hanging fruit. Where can we pick off little wins with little effort? And generally what you see is that the more people start to get into that habit of picking off those little painless gains, suddenly they're improving, they're performing at a higher level without necessarily making significant change to what they do.
Fantastic. What's really interesting there, Hugh, is what I'm interested in is, how do you identify what their strengths and weaknesses are? Is that through stats, or do you do a series of tests with the golfer?
Well, if we're looking at that from a golfing perspective, then it's easy with tour or elite level players now, in that you're surrounded by stats, and being able to interpret those stats effectively is key to identifying where the relevant wins are going to be. And where we can start that kind of painless gains process that I talk about. Ultimately, I like to base everything on what I would call evidence or data. That if we've got to know that what we're doing, what we're asking our athletes and our human beings to commit time to, is going to have an impact. So there has to be some evidence supporting what you're asking the player to do. Without that, you're guessing, and you're asking players. I mean, bear in mind that we, as golf coaches, or as any coaches, we're given a very significant responsibility in that we are being entrusted to help someone with their career. We're being given, certainly when you're talking with elite players and tour players, you're being given this huge talent, and you've got this huge responsibility to ensure that you are doing the right thing by that person. And for me, the only way to guarantee that you're going to help that player is to base everything you do on evidence.
Love that, Hugh. I think it's so important, isn't it? I think, guessing is not going to help anyone, is it? You might get it right once in a blue moon, but you really need that evidence to know where they're at, and to also track if what you're working on is making a difference. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. I mean, and as an industry, I think we're pretty shit at this. But ultimately, we have to. So much of what we do is based on taking one look at a golf swing and deciding that, well, for this player to get better, they need to do X, Y, and Z. And that is, I mean, the audacity of a coach making that judgment call staggers me. That ultimately we need to understand. Let me take a step back. As an industry, we're conditioned to looking at golf swings and figuring out what is wrong with that golf swing. Whereas my approach is fundamentally different. It's the polar opposite. When I look at a golf swing, I want to know why it works. I don't want to know why it doesn't work. I want to know why it works. Because if you go with that approach, then you're much less at risk of changing something that's fundamental to that player's success. Whereas if you go with the fault fixing approach rather than the superpower finding approach, you're at risk of changing something that player's entire game is built around. And that can only have one result. That will make the player worse.
It's I've just been watching the darts at Ali Pali. I'm not sure if you're a darts fan or if you've been watching.
Love the darts.
It got me thinking, watching the different techniques of the players. And I was wondering how much detail they've gone into. Like Peter Wright changed his darts in the, I think, second or third set, like in the middle of the final. And I don't know how that would have changed his technique if it did, but just all the different techniques of, I wonder, I bet there's not too much sort of work on stroke, would you say? Do you know?
Well, define good technique for me.
One that gets the dart into the treble 20 a lot.
Basically being able to produce consistent, appropriate outcome, right?
Okay.
Yeah. How does that differ from golf?
I would say it doesn't.
And I suspect, I'm going to make a sweeping judgment call here, Ollie, but I suspect if you listen to the way the commentary has evolved in darts, technique will become a bigger part of darts. Do you think they're a little bit behind then when it comes to that? Nope. I would say they're ahead and at risk of going behind. That
I
ultimately
love that, yeah.
when you listen to the commentary, you hear more and more of the announcers or the analysts talk about technique. Where if you go back to the golden days of Sid Waddell, there was very, very little mention of technique. And then this has a very sort of invasive effect on the industry as a whole, because people who are darts fans or golf fans start to become more aware of technique. And certainly, again, I'm going to be quite critical of our industry. Certainly, the majority of the stuff that's spoken about technique in our golf commentary is absolutely terrible. It is. Yeah, it's ignorant advice.
Totally. I think that a big factor to darts and to golf, linking the two, I would say, is the power of seeing the result before you actually produce the shot. Visualization, targeting strategy, call it whatever it is. Let's talk a little bit about what you think the importance of that is, Hugh?
I don't think it's important for everyone. I think the nature of a player's intent will change from player to player. So you will have players like Ollie Wilson, who is a very technically driven player, clearly an exceptional player over the course of his career. And then you'll have a Bubba Watson, who's the complete opposite, who's very much painting pictures and very much driven, but he's reacting to the environment that he's in. There isn't a right or wrong way of doing it, but there is a right or wrong way of doing it for every player. And sort of one of the great failings of the golf industry is that we transpose these beliefs on every single player. And great coaching is about finding the right combination for each and every player in front of you, rather than saying, well, this is an absolute. And the challenge with this, as soon as you start throwing out absolutes in anything in life, but particularly in golf, you can rest assured that someone will come around the corner and disprove the absolute straight away. There are so few absolutes in terms of the game of golf. There's so few absolutes in terms of human behavior.
What would you say an absolute in golf is?
If the ball's on the ground, the shaft needs to be leaning more at impact than address. There you go, that's it.
Let me get my head around that. The ball is on the ground for every shot?
Yeah. But I'm pretty sure there's people out there that are able to effectively do that with the shaft leaning back, but I'm pretty sure they're not playing on tour.
Huh. Interesting. I like it a lot. And what's an absolute in life?
God, that's philosophical. Absolute in life. Actually, yeah, you've stumped me. I can't answer that straight off the bat. Give me a couple of weeks to think about that, and I'll come up with a good answer. Next time I'm on the podcast, I'll have an answer for that.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, if you do come up with it in 20 minutes, let me know, and we'll
I will for sure.
With regards to sort of managing different players, I've got a question here from Charles. I know you know Charles. I think pretty
I'm
well.
going to guess this is Charles Sanderson Woods,
the one and only.
Morning, Charlie.
He is the main man. Very good guy, good friend, and he's got some good question for you, which is, how do you manage different personalities on tour?
I think first stop is you need to take time to understand that personality. It's very difficult to coach someone without getting some sense of how best you can coach them, without some sense of how best to interact with that human being. And as you can imagine, on tour, you've got just as diverse cross-section of the population as you have in everyday life. So you'll have some guys who respond very, very well to explicit instruction, who will respond very well to a very blunt, no, mate, that's just not good enough. But then you'll get others where you need to take a much more gentle approach. But the human element, and again, I'm going to be very critical of our industry, is that the human element is what sets apart the great coaches from the good coaches, the understanding of the human element. And effectively, we are coaching human beings at a specific endeavor. We're not coaching a specific endeavor to human beings. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And taking the time to understand, I mean, I'm lucky in that I've been blessed with, I guess, one of my superpowers is an ability to sort of, number one, understand where a person's coming from pretty quickly, but number two, adapt my behavior to that person. That's where you have to start. And also then you have the complexity of adding in where the player is with their game at that time. Are they under stress? Are they under pressure? Are they trying to keep a card? Are they really struggling with their game? Have they gone on a great run? Have they gone on a poor run? there's so many elements to consider before you can make a judgment call on the direction to take that player at that moment in time. And the challenge of coaching on tour is that you've got, on one hand, you've got the players need to perform on a pretty much immediate basis. But on the other hand, you've got the need to develop that player over time. So you almost need to correlate what I would call quick fix or tip coaching with development coaching. And not at any stage are you really prioritizing one massively over the other.
Wonderful. That's great, Hugh.
Hope that answers your question, Charles.
Charlie will love that. He'll come back with another one, though.
Rest assured. We all know that's the case, don't we?
We do. And so have I. I've got a question for you on that. Obviously, I mentioned you're a wonderful mind, and you talking about that, that sort of super skill of yours to read people, if you like. Where did you learn that skill or develop that skill over time, and how did you develop it?
Number one, I think I've always been much more aware of a person's state of mind or emotional state, or where they are intellectually and emotionally. I've genuinely always been more aware of that than a lot of other people. And the more I don't know. I think it's just something I've been born with. I mean, I would say that I'm naturally more empathetic than most. I'm naturally, I am an introvert, which I think you tend to be more understanding and aware of other people's behaviors as an introvert. I can remember as a kid being in situations where I just felt uncomfortable for someone because I knew they were uncomfortable, if you like. And then I guess that's because that's a part of me. That's part of my genetics, if you like, my DNA. That's definitely influenced how I coach, because I think it's so fundamental to being an effective coach. Have I made a conscious effort to develop it? No, I've made a conscious effort to understand it. I've read a lot about it. I've researched a lot about it. And I guess as a product of that, that's developed my skill further. But it's part of me. It's who I am. That's where it started all.
Brilliant. That's great. And for the listeners listening, can you perhaps give a basic sort of framework, or for them to sort of see in their mind different personalities? Can we try to help you? You mentioned introvert there. Can we perhaps sort of talk a little bit along those lines to help the listeners? Because I think you're right that the coaches don't understand the human, but I think also that the student doesn't know themselves as well. So,
and particularly when you're dealing with young men specifically, but young women as well. And by young, I mean under the age of 35. I mean,
by young, I mean, get in.
Yeah, you're just
not feeling young, but thank you now, Hugh. I like it.
But basically, so much of it is about life experience. That the more and more you experience, the more, for both for good and bad, the more you become aware of who you are. But I think effective coaching in any walk of life is about getting the human being to understand who they are, and also understand both the strengths and weaknesses of who they are. So, for example, I run a mentoring program called the Coach Mastery Program, which Charles is one of the students on it this year. And one of the first things we do is we get people to really explore who they are, explore their values, explore how they function, and recognize that there are some extremely good elements of that, and there are some extremely bad elements of that. And understanding how to balance both sides of that coin is fundamental to you being a high performer. So being endlessly optimistic as an example, that generally makes you a good person to be around, but it will make you happier about the same thing that a pessimist will be sad about. It's equally delusioned. We're functioning on the opposite ends of the delusion spectrum, if you like. But ultimately, there's always a pro and always a con to who you are and how you behave and how you see the world. Understanding the downsides and the upsides to that is pretty central to being a high performer in anything, to being effective in anything.
Brilliant. So I like the listeners are sort of thinking, wow, you know, perhaps I don't work enough on my mental side, if you want to call it that, or my performance side of golf. I work on my swing. I go to the range. I might go to the putting green if we're very lucky, and I've drummed it into them enough. But maybe they don't work enough on that mental part of golf. Do you have any sort of direction you can sort of lead the listeners down towards to perhaps help improve that area or train that area?
I mean, I think we've just discussed it for the last few minutes, that if you start by understanding who you are, and let's use me as a fairly crappy example of a golfer, that I would certainly never be accused of being one of the world's great optimists on the golf course. And historically, that's done me an awful lot of harm, and that I've generally had quite a temper as well on the golf course. And when I hit a couple of bad shots, my assumption is that that's me for the rest of my life. I'm never going to hit a good shot again. And the more I come to terms with that and understand that actually, well, that's clearly not true. That's a very emotional response. But as soon as I start to come to terms with the fact that isn't the case, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be delighted or I'm not going to be pissed off about hitting a bad shot, but it does mean that I understand that there's a decent chance that there's a good shot not far away. The understanding of self, I think, is fundamental to developing these mental skills that you talk about. Again, like the golf swing, there is not one template you can apply to every single person from a mental training perspective. But for me, the very highest performers in all walks of life generally understand themselves better than the rest.
Okay.
And that understanding of self ultimately leads to making more objective judgment calls, not responding to the fluctuations in emotion that we all suffer from. It's much more this is what's happening, and this is how I generally respond, and there'll be some upsides to that, and there'll be some downsides to that. Throw all that in the pot together, and let's make an objective judgment call as to how to proceed.
Yeah. And you've been lucky enough to work with some of the sort of top athletes in our game, who I bet I'd sort of imagine are very good at those skills. Who are the golfers that you work? No, okay,
not always. No,
not always. Can you share with us who you've worked with, Hugh, and perhaps share what you can or what you're comfortable sharing, what they're like personality wise, and what?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the golfers I've worked with, there's, Christ, I don't know where to start. It's been fairly numerous, but anything from tournament winners, Ryder Cup winners, people that have struggled to get their card, people that have struggled to keep their card, people that have won on Challenge Tour, won tour school. A pretty wide range. I mean, I was asked to do it for something recently, and I think we're running into the 50s or 60s of the players that I've spent time with.
Wow.
The reality is that they are all fundamentally different. Not only are they different from a golf game perspective, but they are different from an intellectual and emotional perspective. And every single one of them needs to be managed differently, and managed differently depending on where they are. Going back to one of our original discussions here, that managing differently to where they are as in their game, as human beings and in life, etc. And in a lot of instances, is getting them to understand that actually, well, you're moving house, you're trying to get a card on PGA Tour and European Tour, you've just got married, you just had your first kid. it's going to be very difficult for that player to commit as much bandwidth to their golf game as they could 6 months prior.
Sure.
And in a lot of instances, getting them just to understand that is the first step. Now, that's not to suggest that they're going to listen to me and also modify their behaviors accordingly. But you've got to be, as a coach, you've got to be aware that there's always stuff going on. It's not just as simple as, well, this guy's swinging it like this, so I need to get him to do this.
Yeah. There's always, you need to, I think Phil Kenyon talks about what's under the bonnet.
Mm-hmm. And that under the bonnet is not like a motor car. That under the bonnet changes all the time with everyone.
Yeah, totally. With your schedule, Hugh, share with us what it's like. What's a typical year? Christ, what's that? What we don't know the last couple of years, but what would be a sort of normal year? How many weeks out on tour do you spend, and how do you manage that schedule? And talk us through the ups and downs of tour
typically
life.
I'll spend historically I've spent between 20 and 30 weeks on the road. That would be either a Sunday night to a Wednesday evening or a Thursday evening. A couple of exceptions, like the Middle East swing coming up, I'll be away for a couple of weeks. One of the big changes I've made over the last few years is to be quite disciplined about my diary, so I don't end up working 7 days a week for 6 months in a row. Generally, Sundays are days I take off. If I come back on a Wednesday night, I will do a little bit of coaching Thursday and a little bit of coaching Saturday. Fridays, either the morning or the whole day is given over to running my coach mastery program on a weekly basis. And yeah, that's about the lot. It's the travel can be quite demanding, depending on where we're going and how long we're there for. When I look back to some of the ludicrous trips I've made to the west coast of the States for 3 days or 4 days, to Australia for 3 or 4 days, I think, Christ, I have no idea how I managed to survive that at the time, and I certainly couldn't do it now. But it's a very, very movable lifestyle, and not for everyone. I think it can be difficult. Absolutely, it can be difficult.
Where's your favorite place to go on tour, Hugh, and why?
Oh Lord, so many. Hong Kong, because it's just a great city. Munich, because just lots of good memories there. Friends in Munich. Generally, any Italian Open's good. You know what you're going to get: a parkland course and great food. It's the Middle East is great because obviously the weather, the hotels are good, the facilities are good. Pretty much every venue has its upsides and its downsides. There's some destinations that I wouldn't choose to go, which I probably won't share with you, but I'm extremely lucky in that effectively I've been able to make a living traveling the world. And one of the things that I made a conscious decision to do very early was, I'm not going to be one of these guys that just sees hotel, golf course, hotel, airport, home. I actually want to see where I'm going. And a lot of the time, that means I won't stay near the golf course. I'd stay in the centre of town, so I'm able to go and explore it. It means that I don't stay in official hotels where I'm stuck talking golf for 4 days in a row. I'll go and find somewhere on my own, so I get a chance to see the country. And I mean, that's been one of the great upsides, if you like, to what I do for what I've been able to do for a living.
I'm sure golf's took you to some venues, some locations that you'd maybe not have got the opportunity to.
100%. Would I have ended up in China without golf? Absolutely not. Doesn't mean I'm going to rush to go back to China, but I've been very lucky to be able to combine that with what I do for a living. What's
your go-to food in Italy?
Depends where I am. If I'm by the sea, I'll generally eat fish. If I'm in Rome, it will definitely be some cheesy pasta of some kind. That's just chops and changes for depending on where I am.
Delicious. With a glass of red wine?
Always.
Always. I love
Always.
it.
Maybe not just one.
No, good. So you mentioned the Middle East going out there in maybe this week, are you, or next week?
A week today.
Week today. Who are you working with out there, and what would the sort of week look like?
So I'll be with Torbjorn Olsen, Scott Jameson, and Steve Brown for these first couple of events.
Yeah.
This is slightly different in that all of the guys have been out there, a sort of combination of holidaying and preparing. So I fly out the week before the Abu Dhabi tournament to do some preparatory work with all of them away from the tournament. Because it's the first event of the year and it's a Rolex series, generally everyone will be itching to go on Monday morning. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday will be a combination of range time and golf course time with each player. And then tournament kicks off on Thursday through Sunday, and that's a case of just reacting to what's in front of you at any given time, going out and watching them play. Then we're on to Dubai the following week.
Nice, that's good. With like the range work or maybe the putting work, I don't know if you work with them on the putting green or if it's just the range, but what does that time look like from a technical part to, I don't know, skill development to skill testing to performance drills? Do you have like is it like supervised practice, some of it? Do you help them with that?
Most of it's supervised practice.
Okay.
Can't physically coach someone 4 hours a day for 4, 5, 6 days in a row.
No.
But again, I mean, not wishing to be evasive, I don't know. It's going to look different for every player at every point in time. Mm-hmm. Some players, Torbjorn tends to err more towards the technical in his practice. But curiously enough, when you do get him into performance practice, or what we call performance practice, his ability to engage with any task or challenge is pretty immense. You ask him to do something, he will get right into it.
Really, that's nice.
And other players aren't quite so committed to that.
With Torbjorn, how is his headspace at the moment? Is he obviously he's been perhaps in the press for the wrong reasons recently? Is he good?
Yeah, he's very good. He's obviously that was a huge relief for everyone. But there's no question that it's really it's got in the way. It's basically put his career on hold for 2.5 years.
Nice.
But he's the one thing about Tor is he's a remarkably resilient human being. He's a very tough athlete, and I know that he will come back stronger and better as a product of it. And now he doesn't have this over his this cloud hanging over him, and we can get back to doing what he does best and moving on with life.
That's exciting. He's a really exciting golfer to watch on the golf course.
Yeah, when he's in full flow, he's really impressive and a proper competitor. He doesn't know how to back down.
No, that's good. So just going on to putting, Hugh, working with top athletes like Torbjorn and Steve Brown, what do you notice top athletes do well on the putting green compared to, I don't know, perhaps some amateur golfers who don't perform as well?
Single biggest difference is ability to read green and pace.
Okay. Let's go into more detail.
That to me is what separates the good from the great.
Okay.
And their ability to match their read and pace to the way they stroke it.
Beautiful.
Okay. Mechanically, there's an awful lot of people that are very good at starting it online.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't consider them great putters. So yes, the mechanics are clearly important. I'm not being dismissive of that at all, Ollie. But the very best know how to combine their read with their aim, with their speed. Keyword being there.
There, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. And do you have a go-to drill or one of your favorite drills that you could perhaps share with the listeners that they could go and have a go at matching their line and speed?
Um, I, I will tend to. I like any drill that is demanding a result,
Yeah.
and generally, hole-out drills are good for that. So just a simple 3, 4, 5, 6 foot compass drill, setting a baseline score and trying to beat it. I do a lot of ladder work for pace with very specific outcomes. So just simple create a space behind the hole where they've either got to hold the putt or roll it into that space, and doing that from sort of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 feet, or 3, 9, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 feet. But anything that's asking them, challenging them to do to produce a specific outcome. Because I certainly don't specialize in putting, I will tend to stay away from true mechanic work, because there are better people than me out there, frankly. And let's face it, the putter only moves 3 feet. It can't be that difficult. Let's leave it to some real experts rather than the proper stuff, which is hitting balls. That's tongue in cheek, but it's the real mechanical work. I would tend to move that on to someone else. I'd refer to someone else, and the reality is that I will use a lot of gate stuff. I'll use a lot of outcome based stuff in the limited amount of putting work I do.
Okay, I think a nice way to develop skill for golfers is to be playful, and I don't know if you agree with that that comment, but I would say that it's important in any part of golf to be quite playful to develop skill. But I find it quite hard for a lot of good players tend to want to do it proper rather than be playful. How do you, is that something you see, and how do you sort of get them to be playful? Try and get them to be a bit more playful.
Well, I think there's a time and a place for everything. Generally, to be playful, some kind of competition, whether it's chipping competition, putting competition, because you can include other players in that. That's something where the coach or the caddy could get involved in that. Our industry is so bloody fickle, Ollie, that when a trend comes along, we suddenly jump in that and go, well, that's the answer. That playful side is part of the answer, but the serious side is also part of the answer. Doing it properly is part of the answer. And then each and every athlete will have more of one or the other. They'll tend to favor the playful over the proper, or vice versa. So again, it boils down to your skill as a coach in working with different individuals to identify what the best way is to work with that human being. That my experience of getting, going back probably 10 or 15 years now, Paul Casey used to come along to the county coaching sessions that I ran, and we'd have Paul being with 12-year-olds and 40-plus-year-olds, and basically Paul's remit was dead simple. I said, I don't want you to do anything here. I want you just to fit in like a player. I just want you to be a 12-year-old with the 12-year-olds. Not difficult for Paul, but likewise, I just want you to contribute and be active and engaged as a player. I don't want you to do anything different. I don't want you to behave anything in a different manner. And it was amazing how much he responded to that environment. And in his defense, he said quite frequently afterwards that actually that it kind of reintroduced me to the challenging, playful side of practice, because as a player, it's very easy to get away from that. Now, ultimately, when he's working on his game, it's serious. Sure. There are times where it's very serious, but he also responded incredibly well to that playful, outcome-based, competition, challenge-based environment. And to be honest with you, Ollie, that is not unusual. No. I do see that with a lot of players.
Totally. No, that's great. Hugh, I think like I've learned so much from that conversation today. You know, what I've learned is how the reason that you're one of the sort of leading coaches out in the UK and maybe across the world is because of your mindset, and your coaching philosophy is certainly open to change to everyone, if that makes sense. I think that's been the biggest learning I've took. So I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for coming on to the show. Would you just
No, it's a
share with the
pleasure, Ollie.
listeners? Could you just share with the listeners your website? And I know you do online lessons and anything else that you perhaps can point them
Yeah,
to.
well, you can find me at www.hughmarr.com. I do online stuff via Skillist, and I also run, as I said, my Coach Mastery program, which is it's a coach development program not aimed at any type of golf coach specifically. It's aimed at everyone from a rank beginner golf coach to very experienced coaches, with the emphasis very much on developing the skill and art of coaching rather than just focusing on becoming more knowledgeable mechanically.
Wonderful. I've knowing Charlie well, or Charles, he's speaks very highly. I'm sure he does. He's told you that, but it's nice to hear from someone else. He is finding a lot of benefits from that course.
Yeah, and we're the academic year for that starts on the 1st of April. So if there's anyone that wants more information, they can contact me via the website.
Brilliant. Hugh, really appreciate your time. Have a great 2022.
Thank you, Ollie. Same to you.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.